Hey everybody, welcome. Welcome to our webinar. I just we had few little button setting mishaps, so we just got that set. While everybody's getting logged in, I will just go over our notes about the class as I always do. So if you've attended these classes in the past, just bear with me for a minute. This is a webinar style class, so we can't see you or hear you during this event. When you have questions, you'll open up that Q&A box, type your questions into that box, and Louie will be taking questions at the end of the class. I'll be monitoring those. If you need anything else, you're welcome to send me a chat. I'll be monitoring that during the class, and I'm just checking. I have opened it up, so you all can send me a chat if you need anything from me, and I'll do my best to answer your questions about any issues you're having. I think that about covers it. Louie, thank you so much for stepping in to do this class. We appreciate it. And Louie is going to be speaking with us today about winter plants for pollinators. And before I forget, just so everybody knows, we are recording today. And if you'll be able to access that link tomorrow if you need to leave early for any reason. All right, Louie. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you,
Have at it.
Sally. Hello, my name is Louie, and I work here at the Fairfax location. I work out in the tree and the shrubs. And Sally asked me to go ahead and do winter plans for pollinators. And I'm really glad that she gave me the opportunity to do that, considering the weather right now. It is like really, really cold out there. And it's just one of those things where the bee population right now is actually on a decline, and anything we can do to help out bees is just really important. So let's go ahead and get to my PowerPoint. So when you consider looking at this and you're seeing like the new snow and everything, you have to remember that there's all sorts of different pollinators that are in this picture. We just can't see them, and they're wintering through. And so any way we can help them winter through is a really good idea. This is a hellebores, and it's probably one of the best plants for pollinators in the springtime or in the late winter. And you have to remember that with a lot of pollinators, when they come out of hibernation or if they come out of their hives, they're extremely hungry. And having this very, very early blooming plants is extremely important because that's the time where they're the hungriest. In fall, they have a really good supply, usually of honey, or they're going into their hibernation. And then in the springtime or in the late winter is where, if the honey is running low, this is where it's important to go ahead and make sure that there's flowers. So this is the typical type of winter garden. And there's some hellebores in there, and there's also some winter heath. And it's just a typical type of garden for winter, but it's also a really good garden for pollinators. If you look way in the back on the right-hand side, it looks like there's forsythia flowers that are just about ready to pop. So with that, we're going to go over some of the topics for today. One of them is how bees survive during the wintertime. Some of the characteristics of winter flowering plants. The actual plants themselves, we're going to talk in detail about those. And then the other thing is other insights that I have for you towards the end of the seminar. So let's get started. So here's a bee on a hellebores, and he is very, very hungry. So let's talk a little bit about the life of a bee. Honeybees in general do not hibernate. They actually are alive during the wintertime. There's a certain type of honeybee that emerges in the fall and lasts through the wintertime. And this bee tends to be a little bit more equipped, a little bit more equipped for the cold than the honeybees that you see during the spring, summer, and fall. So what happens within the hive is you have the queen bee, which is in the middle, and then you literally have all the other bees around that bee, and they're flipping their wings and getting air through there, which gives them a lot of warmth. I don't know if you ever seen penguins down in the Antarctic and how they survive the winter. What happens is you have the penguins in the middle, which are staying warm, and you have the ones on the outside, which actually shield the ones on the inside from the cold. And then literally what happens is the ones that are warm go outside of the circle, and then the ones that are from the outside go in, warm up, and they basically have all this rotation going on so that everyone gets some warmth. And one thing I find amazing about that is how it's more of a colony. It's not an individual, that everyone works together in that hive to make sure that everyone stays warm. Um, the actual honey itself is what they feed off of. And there's this stuff called Quiescent pollen, which is called bee bread. And they munch on that through the season to try to keep themselves warm. And here's a couple bees. So what happens is when the temperature gets around 40 degrees or more, they go and some of the bees start to take off and they leave the nest. One of the big things they do is they relieve themselves. They do not want a lot of, stuff like that in the hive. So they kind of hold it until they get out and then they literally go out and relieve themselves. And at this point is where those bees are looking for a snack. They're looking for anything that's flowering, any kind of pollen, the nectar, all that sort of thing. Um, it's real important though that when they go out there, that they're able to find, these flowers and, get some of them and then bring them back, and then other ones will go out as well. Another thing which I found a little sad is during this time of 40 degrees up, there's some bees that actually die, and so they do red the nest of the dead bees during this time period as well when it's warmer. Um, some other type of bees that winter through are bumblebees. What I find about bumblebees, the queen bee hibernates itself. It goes into the ground and becomes like a cocoon, and it's called a puppy, a puppia. And literally, it actually develops antifreeze to keep itself warm. So it hibernates in the ground and it waits until the springtime, and then it starts doing its eggs, and it starts building a nest or a hive, and with all its babies, and they lay eggs and all that sort of scenario. It's really important. I'll talk about this later about making sure that we don't disturb those bees. A lot of the native bees, there's like over four or not, I mean, native pollinators, there's about 4,000 of them. Most of those are the ones that actually hibernate during the wintertime, and then they could reemerge in the springtime. So it's really important to get habitat for those bees along with the flowers. So going towards what the flowers are all about, there's some certain characteristics when it comes to having winter and early spring blooming flowers. Probably the biggest one is that they're highly scented. A lot of them smell really, really good. The reason why they develop this is when those bees come out, when it gets above 40 degrees and it starts to warm up, they want to make sure they can find them. Remember, they were talking about a little tiny bee and a little tiny flower, and they have to connect. And one of the main reasons and one of the main ways they do this is by scent. And literally, they will go to the flower and they will pollinate it. One thing I always find amazing, when I was in college, I did language of other species, and one of them were bees. And this is sort of a side note, is that bees actually can go and find a whole mess of flowers or a whole mess of, pollen or nectar, and they can actually come back to the hive and do a certain dance. And within that dance, they can literally communicate to all the other bees in the hive where this nectar or where this thing they want them to show, where it is. It's amazing that they can do that. So that's another thing, having clusters of flowers. they can go back and tell all the other bees where those clusters of flowers are. Um, the other thing about them is that a lot of them face downward. The flowers themselves face the ground. The reason why they do this is they want to protect their reproductive parts from the ice and the snow. Not all of them do that, but a lot of them do that. The picture over there is an Edgeworthia, and those flowers literally face downward. Another type of thing that a lot of these plants do is they don't bloom all at once. And a perfect example of that is the camellias. Camellias have what I call buds in waiting. And what I mean by that is that they don't produce flowers all at once. If you look at an azalea and you look at a lot of the spring blooming type flowers, it's like one, two, three, everybody bloom. When these guys are blooming, the actual weather can turn nasty in a heartbeat. If they literally bloomed all at once and we got a snowstorm or if we got ice and freezing rain and all those flowers, disappear, then they lost a lot of that opportunity to get pollinated. By taking their flowers and extending them over a long period of time where they bloom and then we get miserable weather, and then once it warms up again, they bloom again and then it gets miserable, they bloom again. They have literally a lot of opportunities to get those flowers pollinated by the bees. So in camellia, as I said, they have what I call buds in waiting, where they literally will wait until it warms up again, and then you get a different round of flowers on it. And the other thing is less competition. And what I mean by that is these flowers are blooming when there's nothing else out there. So, and there's very few of them. When you think about the spring and you think about the summer, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of flowers out there. And the bees can pick and choose what they want. By having flowers bloom very early in the spring or in late winter or middle of winter, literally there's nothing else around. So when those bees do come out, they will find those flowers, and those are the only ones that they'll be able to pollinate because there's nothing else out there. So that's some of the ways that these wintering flowering plants have formed over the years. So the most exciting part about my seminar is the plants themselves. And, I'm a plant guy, so I really love talking about plants. So the first one is crocus. Crocus is a bulb. It comes out in the very, very late winter, early spring, depending on the variety. They can come through the snow. One side note about crocus, which I really like, is if you ever put down sod in your yard and you have a certain area, just put crocus bulbs down beforehand and literally put the sod on top of them, and they will come right through before the grass really starts to grow. So you'll have a lawn of crocus and you'll have a lawn of bees that will come to them. They're a wonderful plant to use that way. Remember, with all bulbs in general, they literally get their energy for next year's bloom with having their leaves stay up. So after the flower dies, the leaves hang out and they are getting energy from the sun, and all that energy is being cycled into that bulb for sometimes weeks at a time. And then the whole thing will die back to the bulb itself, and that energy will be stored so that the flower will grow next late winter, early spring. If you cut off the leaves right away, there's no way for that bulb to get any energy for the following year's flowers. So just keep that in mind, especially with daffodils. A lot of people cut out their daffodils. It's really important to make sure that those daffodil leaves literally survive so they can get all that energy. Okay, so I can do a whole seminar on camellias. We briefly talked about camellias a couple of minutes ago. They have those buds in waiting. These things, out in the annual house. Last year we had extremely mild winter, but we did have some cold. They bloom for at least 2 months out of the year. I always recommend when you do have camellias in your yard is to make sure that they literally are protected from a lot of really harsh wind. Keep in mind that those leaves themselves are quite large and they are an evergreen. So that plant has to constantly drink up water to keep that green alive. By having that wind cross over the leaf, it accelerates the amount of evaporation off of that leaf. And in doing so, you can get winter burn. And winter burn is where the plant can't keep up with the evaporation rate on the leaf, so it starts to turn brown. So I always suggest to make sure that you keep these in an area where there's not a lot of winter wind. One thing you could do is use wilt proof on it when it gets above 50 degrees. Put wilt proof on your camellias, and I always suggest for the first year to use that anyway. And what that does is it cuts down on the stress of the plant because it seals the leaf so there'll be no evaporation off of it. So one thing about flowers in general, and this is, you know, camellias and a lot of other plants, is if you're concerned about pollinators and you want bees to come there to get the pollen and the nectar off of the flower, make sure that the flower produces it. There's a lot of perennials out there that are made now, and a lot of camellias and a lot of other types of flowers that literally do not have any pollen on them and they don't have any nectar. They literally have been defined so that they literally don't have either one of those. There's some bad things about that. One of them is that it wastes the bee's time or the pollinator's time. When they come to a flower, it takes energy to fly there, it takes energy to stop, it takes energy to start up again. If they get to a flower and there's nothing there for it, it's wasting its time. That's the actual first thing. The second thing is that the flower can't produce any seeds or anything like that. So literally no pollen. The finches can't get the seeds during the wintertime. It can't reproduce. So they are pretty amazing when they come to the looks of them, and that's what, a lot of people are about. But if you're, concerned about, the bees and concerned about, pollination and pollinating gardens and stuff like that, make sure that your flowers have the nectar and the pollen on them. So, and then we already talked to you all about the buds in waiting. It's amazing how long these camellias can flower for. Okay, so the winter daphne is probably one of the best, if not the best, of any scented plant I know of. They literally are not the easiest plant to grow, but they want if you get them to grow and you get a perfect spot for them, then literally you are very lucky. And there was there's a garden walk that I used to do years ago. We did it every year, and a bunch of us went down into Arlington. And there's some aged gardens down there that are just stunning in the springtime. And there's this one house that we used to go to. It was a little tiny Sears and Roebuck houses. And in the front, there was an amazing, very, very old oak tree. And next to the oak tree was this winter daphne. And this winter daphne was probably 60, 70, 80 years old. It was probably 4 or 5 feet high, and it literally was probably about 6, 7 feet wide. It was huge. It was just unbelievable. So we used to go there and we used to smell it, all these garden people. There's like probably 5 of us. And one time we went over there and the new owner came out, and she was this English lady, and she was looking at us, and we're on her property, and she looked up and she's like, "What are you doing?" And we're like, "We're smelling your daphne. We do this every year." And she was she's English, so she was a gardener, and she said one of the main reasons why she bought the house was because of the daphne. It was incredible. Um, as I said, there was a very, very old oak tree there. Well, the oak tree died, and so they had it cut down. So we came one year and we freaked out. So we actually knocked on the door and talked to the lady because we knew her at that point. She was expecting us. And she said that yes, that it actually died and they took it down. But what was amazing to me is that the Daphne was fine. It actually adapted to the harsh afternoon sun on it. So it's always amazing to me when, some plants you think, if you don't have the right conditions, excuse me, that they won't survive. With this type of plant, with this winter daphne and so many other ones, once they're established and the environment changes and they might get a little less sun or a little bit more sun, they are adaptable to that. So, but I love winter daphne. It's a very attractive plant. Has a little tiny bit of variegation on its tips. And what I mean by the soil is it's a moist, well-drained soil. It's almost like a sponge. And so it doesn't get saturated that there's no air in there, but also it doesn't dry out very easily. If you look at an old growth forest, um, and you notice the soil in there, that's the soil I'm talking about. It has years and years and years, hundreds and thousands of years of leaves being put one on top of the other and having all these micro organisms eating away at the leaves and pooping out this really good soil. And then you have a little bit of clay that comes up to give some nutrients. It's like a sponge. It holds water, but there's air pockets all through it. And that's what the winter daphne loves. And a lot of the plants that we have in this area, especially the native ones, love that type of soil. Okay, the Cornus moss dogwood is probably one of my favorites. I did see it down at the National Arboretum where they have all the Capitol pillars going up. If you go take that path up in the springtime, you'll see this plant. It has incredible bark on it, even without the flowers. And then the flowers emerge in the springtime, and the flowers are amazing. They're like little tiny bouquets of yellow flowers. If you see the Harley Davidson place down on Route 50, in front of that, there's one Cornus moss there, and I always enjoy it when I drive home at night. It's a wonderful plant, but it also gives you a cherry, and I forget the name of it, but it's a type of cherry, and it's edible, so you can actually eat it. So this Cornus moss dogwood actually has three very nice things about it. It has wonderful bark. It has flowers that come out in very, very early spring, so it does help out with, the pollinators. But it also gives a lot of food to nature, and it also gives food for us. The sweet box is another one of my favorites. I'm going to say that a lot, by the way. The sweet box comes out in the springtime with real small flowers that you might not even notice. But what you do notice is the scent. And this stuff spreads, and it's a shade plant. So, and it's an evergreen. It's a very high ground cover. It gets about, a foot to about 18 inches high, and it can spread out about 3 to 4 feet. And it's also, I believe, deer resistant. The neat thing about it is in the early spring, it comes out with these real small flowers that are highly fragrant. And because it comes out really early in the spring and late winter, it's very, very cool. And, you kind of wonder about, fresh flowers and why they put it in a refrigerator. It slows down the process of the flower. So again, a lot of these winter and spring blooming plants, because of the winter, because of the coolness, they last for a very, very long period of time. So you get this very beautiful evergreen carpet in shade, because grass doesn't grow well in shade. I mean, putting in a carpet of green and then putting a pathway through it is a lot more sensible than putting grass in there. But then in the early spring on a nice day, just go out there with a lawn chair and sit down, and it really does. It smells almost like a gardenia. So it's really, really nice plant to use in your garden. Okay, now we come to Edgeworthia. This is called the Chinese paper shrub. It's really become very, very popular over the last couple of years. It is by far one of the most wonderful scented plants again because of doing, in the winter, early spring. They want to get their scent out there as much as possible. The form of this plant is amazing. And what I mean by that, it has these really smooth type of branching on it, and there's no leaves during the time period when it's blooming. But it reminds me of a jade plant, just the way that it grows. They can get large over time, but they are definitely a showstopper. Um, Down at the Arlington place where we used to go, there was a real big one there, and we used to lay down on the ground and look up at the flowers on it. And you feel like you're in heaven because you have that incredible scent, and you look up there and you see all these flowers facing you. And what happens with this plant is right after it flowers, and in the fall, they actually form their flower buds. And then they sit there, and then all of a sudden, at some point, is where they start to grow. And I'm talking, in February. Um, and then after the flowers come these leaves. And the leaves look semi-tropical. They're very long looking, and it looks almost like a tropical plant, more so than something that you would see outside in our area. And then in the fall, it turns into a brilliant yellow, and then it loses all of its leaves. And then in turn, you get all the buds starting out. So this is what I call a four-season plant, that it will literally, give you interest through all four seasons. It does like to be shielded a little bit the in the hot sun. But again, I have seen them in the hot sun, and some of them do very well. But it's one of those plants that I mentioned to you that they do face down, so that they literally will be able to protect their reproductive parts during the wintertime from the ice and the snow and the miserable weather. So this is what it looks like. It's a real showstopper. There's some people I know that have a garden, and they've made a peninsula out into the grass, and they stuck one there so that when they look out, they see this long vista of lawn, and they have this edgeworthia coming out as a real showstopper in the late winter, early spring. And when they're, at their window, they literally can look out and see it. And as a side note, with a lot of these plants, they bloom when we literally are indoors a lot. You don't want to actually go, okay, do you want to go see the Edgeworthia? Yeah, let's get our winter jacket on, let's get our boots on, and then we'll head down to the lower 40 of our yard and take a look at it, and then come back. A lot of these plants, they need to be where you can see them from a window, where you can, walk out to get your mail or something like that. And what's the thrill about these is when it does warm up, you'll see bees on it in the middle of wintertime. And it's always a good feeling that you're helping out the bee population and the other pollinators. Okay, I could do a whole seminar on hellebores. Again, one of my favorite plants. We have tons and tons and tons of hellebores here in the late winter, early spring. Romero, I think it's one of his favorites. He brings all sorts of different ones in, and they're always coming out with different varieties. When I first started working in the industry, the nursery industry, literally all the hellebores face downward. And if you take a camera and you look at all the parts of the hellebores, they're amazing. And when they get the little tiny seed pods on them, it's unbelievable. But they literally face down. Now they have some that face out, and I believe they're starting to come out with some that face upward. Um, I'm a huge fan of flowers and everything, but I do like the idea of them facing sideways. I don't like the idea of them facing up. So one interesting thing about them is that they get a lot of babies on them. And it's not like that you have to, do something to make it happen. They just do it naturally. So if you get different varieties of these and they cross-pollinate, you can get some varieties that no one else has. But it will teach you patience. And what I mean by that with hellebores is once the seed hits the ground, and what I recommend, first of all, is taking some of the mulch away and maybe putting down some wonderful topsoil so that the seed drops into soil instead of dropping into a top of a piece of bark where it can't germinate. So once they get in there, the first year you'll get like two leaves that come out, and that's it. It takes a long time to go from a seedling or a seed to the actual flower itself. But I guarantee you it is worth the wait because you can get tons and tons of different flowers on these. I mean, it's amazing to me. They come out with ones that are, spotted. They comes out with ones that are different shades of this, different shades of that. They do have some that are doubled, um, petaled, meaning there's more than one layer of flowers on them. And you'll get so many different types of them. This will happen over time. I have seen these in woodland gardens. They do like to be protected from the afternoon sun. So the woods are a perfect place for this. And by the way, they are deer resistant. So what happens with this, and they are considered evergreen too, by the way. So what happens with these plants is that they come out with leaves after they flower. And the leaves literally last all through the summertime. There is some variegated leaves on these and some very interesting ones. So then in the early or late winter into spring, you'll start to notice that you'll get this emergence of the flower stalks coming in. At that point, I always suggest to go out there and cut off all the leaves. The reason why I say that is the leaves at this point look very rowdy, or they don't look nice because of the weather. So you get this huge bouquet of hellebore bouquets, and you can get scattered ones of these all through the season. What happens is you get one stem of flower, and then over time you get two, you get four, you get eight, and you get these huge clumps of hellebore flowers on them. And the bees go ballistic. When you go out there on a nice day with all the flowers that, the hellebores that Romero gets in, it's amazing to see all the different bees on them. It's a very, very important plant to use. And again, because they bloom in very cool weather, their flowers last for a long, long period of time.
Hey, Louie, we've got some questions about deer resistance, which I'll hold because we can cover that in more detail when we start doing Q&A. But we have got a couple of questions in asking about rabbits. Do you know if rabbits are a particular problem for the hellebores?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. What?
Do rabbits eat hellebore?
I don't know. I know that rabbits get pretty hungry in the wintertime.
Yeah, I know a lot of
I
animals
know
eat
that
stuff.
Peggy has tons and tons of these in her yard, and I know that she has rabbits, but I'm not 100% thinking. I would actually Google that and see what they have to say.
Yeah, I
I
haven't heard of
really
it. We
do
have
not
one
know
person
about
who
rabbits.
says rabbits haven't eaten theirs. So, but
I know
that's all anecdotal. So,
one thing I've noticed, and this has happened in the last probably 15 years, is that there's a lot of foxes out there now. And, I know people are, love their rabbits, but rabbits do eat a lot of different types of plants. But the fox is actually bringing the rabbit population down. But no, Sally, I do not know if rabbits are, if hellebores are resistant to
thanks.
rabbits.
I will tell people who are asking, we've had two people respond and say they have hellebores and no rat issues with rabbits, but that's all anecdotal. So sounds like something to call, check maybe with our plant clinic or
Okay.
check it out online. Thanks, Louie.
Okay, thanks for the chime in there, Sally. Okay, let's go on to Mahonia. Mahonia is a deep, deep shade plant, and their flowers come out literally in the late fall into winter, and they can last for a long, long period of time. They're highly fragrant, and the other neat thing about them is that they basically have wonderful scent on them, and you can see the bees on them when it gets above there. One of the neat things about them is that they are deer resistant. They remind me a little bit of a holly in the sense of they have a lot of prickly to them. I do see them in the woods. I don't see, they're not like barberry where they take over the woods, but I do see them. They really stand out because they are an evergreen. They remind me of a palm tree. And what I mean by that is that they have leaves that come out and then they have a stalk underneath it. So they actually look like a palm tree. The other neat thing about them is that they send out suckers to a degree so that they literally are able to form like a cluster of them. Um, but they're a wonderful plant. They literally get blue berries on them that the birds like, and they carry them on their way. But again, it's one of those plants that really it's important for the pollinators on these because these come out very, you could say very late in the season or very early in the season. But they're a wonderful plant to use for a pollinator, and they're extremely attractive. Um, the other thing about them is they do get big in shade and they get dense in shade. A lot of shade plants, especially evergreen shade plants, don't get as dense because of the lack of sun, especially in deep shade. I find that Mahonia actually will hold their density very well in a very shaded area. Oops. Okay, so let's talk about red maple trees. Um, so the red maple is a native to us. Um, they are a frontier tree, and what I mean by that is when the pines go in there and you're getting ready for the hardwood forest, these red maples will send out their helicopters and they will plaster seeds everywhere. And from those seeds, they get thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of little seedlings, and then those seedlings will grow up relatively quickly. They're a fast growing tree. They're native, so they're not invasive. A lot of people think that they're a nuisance, but they are extremely important for the cycle of getting to a hardwood forest. They set the tone for all those big, you know, black gums and all the oak trees and all those hardwood trees to get started. Um, the other thing about them is that they get thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of flowers on them in the early spring. When you look out into the woods and you see that haze of red up in the trees, those are probably the red maples, and they are starting to bud out. And when they do, those bees look forward to it. They produce thousands and thousands of flowers on them. I can't stress that enough. The more red maples we have, the better off our area will be. It's a wonderful plant to use. The other benefit of these two, by the way, is that birds come up, and Michael Fay has a picture of a bird eating some of the actual flowers on it. So they do produce food for birds that are again very hungry as well. Um, and everybody knows about the red maples and what they look like in the fall. They're a wonderful plant to use. And then all those seeds, by the way, they do actually feed nature as well. One of the sidetracks on that is, I work out here in trees and shrubs, and we have a lot of red maples in the areas around it. And when there's a wind, they actually look like thousands and thousands and thousands of helicopters coming towards us. And then, in the summertime, we're out there weeding the beds, and we're taking out a lot of the red maples. But that's a really important tree to use in your landscape, especially because they relatively grow fast and they give you a lot of beauty and they help out nature amazingly. Okay, so snowdrops. Snowdrops are a bulb, and they basically are probably what I consider to be the first thing that comes out in the spring, in the winter time. They can bloom when it's like 0 degrees outside. It's amazing. This plant is so hardy and so reliable. Um, and they're so funky looking. You know, they face downward. They look like a white, like bell, if you will. But they do have little lime green speckled on some of on some of the varieties. They are so reliable. And again, the bees just love them. And over time, they will go from year to year to year to year. There's tons of different varieties of them. There's a lady I know who actually took a lot of her winter blooming things and put them on a sheet of paper to take photographs. She was a photographer, and it was Karen. And actually, when she was taking the photographs of all these spring blooming plants, all the bees came to the paper and started pollinating them. She was just cracking up about it. But again, it's a very, very important plant to use for pollinators, but it also just gives you hope about how incredible plants are that they can survive in such terrible weather. And they look so beautiful against the snow and against it's just so nice to look outside when it's so miserable and see something like a snowdrop. And here is one of the bees pollinating it. So winter acornis is another bulb that we have. They're really low, low, low to the ground, and they're very, very early blooming. Um, and they literally will bring out a carpet. They basically do have little tiny bulbs that come off of the main one. So over time, they will start to, spread out. But it's a beautiful carpet. Keep in mind that with a lot of these bulbs that you have, when you put them in the woods, when they bloom, there's no leaves on the trees. So they get full sun in the late winter, early spring. After they die, the actual leaves themselves will be able to get enough energy to last to the following, year to get a new bloom on them again. It's amazing to me. I've seen daffodils blooming in real dense shade. And the reason why it's a deciduous forest, and those leaves can retain, enough energy to produce a bloom pretty consistently every year. But these are really, really early blooming. The other thing about them too is that they're yellow. So even when it snows and they come through the snow, you can basically see them. Okay, so witch hazel is amazing. So I remember driving down in Arlington. I used to work down there years ago at a nursery. And during the wintertime, I was going over this on this road, and I came up on this hill. And when I got to the top of it, on the side of the road was a witch hazel. And it was really, really cold, but it was sunny. And I looked over and the sun was actually backlighting it. So the sun came through it. And in doing so, it took all those spider-looking flowers and it made them glow. And I've used that. It's amazing. So during the wintertime when we have witch hazel here, I will bring customers outside and I will put it right smack in the middle of the aisleway. And I will look at it at the point where the sun is behind you. So you can look at it and they go, oh, that's a really beautiful plant. I'm like, you haven't seen anything yet. So we circle around until you have the sun, then you have the witch hazel, and then you have us looking at it. And again, those spiders come to life. It's amazing. It's almost like they're glowing in the dark. So this is a real important plant to use in the wintertime, looking out a window or going, from your car to your front door, going out and getting the mail or whatever. But try to get it. I know it's not possible all the time, but try to get it so either at sunrise or sunset that you have one of these that it will give you that glow during the wintertime. It really, really livens it up. They come in yellow, they come in orange, they come in red. They also, a lot of varieties are extremely fragrant, and you will see the bees on them. But another bonus thing about them is they do get nuts on them, which is interesting. but in the fall, they literally turn into fire. This is what I mean by that. They literally become a bonfire. Um, so you have a plant that literally grows in February, flowers. It doesn't do much during the summer, maybe get some nuts, and the actual leaves are pretty, impressive. They're a small tree, they get real wide and not as tall. But then during the wintertime, you get this big bang of color. But doesn't it look like little spiders at the end of these branches? It's an amazing plant. I went to a trade show one time, and they did come out with other varieties that almost look like they're pink, which is very interesting to me. It's a beautiful plant to use in a garden, and it really is helpful for the bees. Winter jasmine. I've had a relationship with winter jasmine for a long, long period of time. Um, about 5, 6 years after they put in 66 from going from 495 down to Washington, they dug a lot of that out. So they have these huge walls on 66. And I remember going down there and seeing a winter jasmine about 10 feet hanging down this wall. And I wasn't really that familiar with it. And I'm looking at it thinking, Forsythia just doesn't do that. And Forsythia isn't in bloom yet. What the heck is this plant? And it come to find out, while doing some research on it, that it basically was a winter jasmine. And then another year, I went down. I don't know if you've ever been to American University, but they have botanical garden down there. They have plants like you wouldn't believe. And they have this sunken patio. And again, they had this winter jasmine cascading at least 10 feet down this wall. And it was in full bloom when I went there. Just a very, very impressive plant. So I had this relationship over time. So then I'm over at the Reston Town Center and I see this hedge and it looks like boxwood. So I went up to it and I go, this is not boxwood. What in the heck is this? And it was real tidy. And I'm looking real closely at it. And then I got kind of a chill on my back. It turns out there was winter jasmine and they trimmed it back. The flowers on it are the leaves on it are very, very small. I'm not sure if it's going to bloom very well, but it looked like boxwood. So incredible plant to use in the landscape. It's muted, meaning you can see through the air of it, but it has little tiny flowers all the way down and you get very, very long stemmed. So it's a great plant to use. And it's yellow. Okay, so the quince. So we had quince blooming this year, very, very late in the fall into winter, just out of a weirdness. Um, but they actually bloom in the very, very early spring. They have somewhat buds in waiting, meaning some of them will bloom and then other ones will bloom. And you can see that there's a lot of flowers, but there are also a lot of buds on this plant. Beautiful plant to use. They do flower without leaves, like most of these early bloomers do. They literally can be brought inside. You can cut some of the branches off, bring them inside, warm them up, and they actually will bloom inside for you during the wintertime, almost like forsythia. Um, and we always try to get these plants in for the Chinese New Year. A lot of the people that celebrate it think the quince are wonderful for the celebration of it. So we usually try to bring some in to the greenhouse, get them warmed, try to bloom them a little bit early. So, but they come in all sorts of different colors, and they also come in different layers of petals on them. They come in white, they come in peach, they come in red, they come in orange. They do get quite big. There's one over in Reston I saw that was probably about 12 feet high. So this is not one of those shrubs that stay pretty small unless you trim it. They can get pretty substantial, which for something like this, I'm fine with that. Winter heath is a plant that literally looks like it belongs like over in Ireland or over in Wales, up in the Rockies type of deal. It has that type of flair to it. But what I find really interesting about it is that it sets its buds during the summertime, and then they come out during the winter. They're a beautiful, beautiful plant when they are in bloom during the late winter. Um, but it almost looks like rosemary with flowers on it, by the way. So this is what it looks like. So I was introduced to this plant years and years ago, um, and it's called the Arrowwood Dawn, pink dawn, and it's not the Arrowwood that you see that's a native. I don't know why these people decided to do this, but it can be very confusing. Um, this is not the native one. This one comes out in the very, very early spring. It comes out with no leaves. It comes out with clusters of wonderful scented pink flowers on it. And the flowers are highly fragrant. The bees love it, but it's not an arrowwood. It's not one of the plants that's a native. Those come later on that you see all over the woods and everything. But a wonderful plant to use if you want some height in the garden, and also if you want some flowers in the late winter. Okay, so the apricot Peggy Clark is unbelievable. It's a tree. It's an understory tree. It can get 15 feet high. It can get 15 feet wide, give or take. It lines its branches with these flowers on it. And I think it's one of the first trees to bloom in the springtime. And they look like little tiny roses. They're like everything I love about a tree. First of all, is that they're highly fragrant. Secondly, you can zoom in on these and you can see the intimate parts of the actual flower themselves. You can snip these off, bring them inside, and force them like you do the quince or the forsythia. But the tree itself is unbelievable, especially with blue sky behind it. And it literally smells really, really good. Um, and it's a symbol to me that spring is going to come. Some of these other plants, like that, when the snowdrops come out, you go, oh, we still have winter for a long period of time. When the apricot comes out, you know that pretty soon we're going to start to get some nice weather. Um, this is a ornamental apricot, meaning that the fruit that it produces is not edible, but the flowers are. And again, when you think about pollinators and you think about the amount of flowers that you get on this and the amount of flowers that you get on these really early blooming type of trees, you get hundreds and hundreds of flowers on them, if not thousands of them. Having these very early blooming trees is extremely important for our bees. This is a close-up of the flower. You can see all the little pollen on there. Pussy willows, they love water. We've had some emerging probably for the last 2 months on our weeping pussy willows. And this is also another one of those that you can bring it inside and you can force it to bloom a lot earlier. Sometimes they can get a little messy, by the way, because after the airs come out, they literally start to get their pollen on them, and that pollen can go everywhere. So keep that in mind. The bees go up to these things and they literally take a pollen bath, and they become this little pollen puffball, which is wonderful. It's a willow, so it does love to be in some water. And the other neat thing about it is that if you ever want to root a plant, this is a great plant to use to root with it. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have a plant that you want to put roots. So you put it in water, you take a pussy willow or any kind of willow, and you stick that in water. The actual chemical from the pussy willow actually will help the other plant in there to produce roots. Paul McLean told me that, and I always thought he was such a genius when it comes to the old wise things like that. But he literally said, anytime you plant anything, just stick in a few of the pussy willow branches and it will root a lot better for you. Okay, another one is Glory of the Snow. Uh, This reminds you a little bit of crocus. It can come out maybe a little earlier than crocus. It does spread, but it spreads like daffodils. You get little side bulbs that come out, so you will eventually get clumps of them. They do come out with light blue. You get some pink, and you get some white. Remember, with snow, the white is going to be muted, which I like, by the way. So it's not going to give a big pop. But again, this is one of those bulbs, and there's tons of bulbs out there that bloom very early in the spring that really do help the pollinators. And they help us with, getting through the winter as well. I force a lot of bulbs in my apartment, so I have bulbs everywhere which flower all through the winter time. Yeah, it helps to get me through because it'd be so dismal outside. This is a new one for me. Dictylium is a shrub that we carry here in Merrifield. It's getting very, very popular. And I noticed that it flowers in the very, very early spring. And I had no idea. It was just one of those things where I was looking at it going, wow, this thing is, happened a year ago or two ago. The neat thing about it is an evergreen, very, very easy to grow, but has all sorts of different forms on it. You can get one that doesn't get too big, and get maybe a little wider. You can get one that are more upright, and you get some that get really, really big. It does have a little bit of a southern flair to it. It almost looks like feathers when the branches come out. We do have a real nice display of it around our pond out front that we planted a couple of years ago. It's a plant that's really starting to catch on. But the neat thing about it is it helps pollinators. It comes out in the early spring with flowers, with red flowers on it, which I find very attractive. Winter hazel. I was introduced to this years ago when I was down in Arlington on my walk. And that one is amazing. And this is why. Look at that. The flowers come out and they cascade down. And they are incredible. They are so beautiful. They are deer resistant. They're very fragile looking. You wouldn't think they would be able to, with them blooming in, the early spring that we might get a late frost or something. But this thing is extremely resistant. But the flowers on it are almost enchanting. The bees go up and down the weeping thing on it. That does get some interesting berries on it. But you can treat this as a shrub, or you can trim the bottom of it and turn it into a tree form, a multi-stem tree form type of deal. It's one of the lesser known types of hazel. It is in the witch hazel family. It's a very, very attractive plant. And I always telling Joel to make sure that we try to get some of that in. It is a beautiful plant.
Louis, I'm going to cut in for just a moment because we're getting close to 1 o'clock. Just want to let anybody know if you guys need to leave and go back to work or whatever you need to do, that's fine. We have a recording. Everybody will get an email tomorrow with a link to view that. So if you want to catch our Q&A and the rest of the session tomorrow, then you'll be able to do that tomorrow afternoon.
Well, thanks, Sally. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how I contain myself to an hour. I tried. I did this thing at home.
No, I did forget. I apologize. When Louis does his classes, we do an hour and then 30 minutes of Q&A because Louis loves his plants. No, we know you love
We're almost done, all right? Well, and I'll try to talk a little faster, but there's a little funny thing at the end. Anyway, so I have the Carolina jasmine. This is not a jasmine, by the way. It's a semi-evergreen. It comes out with thousands of flowers in the springtime. I always suggest with planting vines, to plant vines that that bloom at different times because you can get full extent of the flowers on it. And this is a native. I've seen it grow wild down in North Carolina. The Okami cherry is the first cherry that I know of that actually blooms first. It blooms so early. I had one in my neighborhood and it started to bloom. This is a couple of years ago. It was actually longer than that. And it snowed, and I'm driving to work in my Subaru, and literally I look over and I see pink snow all over this thing. It was so incredible. So what happened was the snow landed on all the different, um, stems, and then the flowers were there. We didn't get that much snow, so the petals were peeking out of it, and literally it looked like white, pink snow all over this tree. It was probably one of the most attractive. I could kick myself for not taking a picture. I was so wrapped up with it, I forgot all about my camera. I forgot about everything. It's an incredible plant to use in the springtime, or yeah, it's spring or late winter. And again, thousands and thousands and thousands of flowers. Trees are so good for pollinators in the springtime. This is what it looks like really close up with the blue sky behind it. And then the star magnolia. Star magnolias basically give you some nice fragrance. They basically give you some pollinators. The only thing about them is when they bloom, sometimes there's a frost. So it's one of those plants that when it's in bloom, really enjoy it because it's not going to last if we get a frost. It does turn brown. I find them to be extremely attractive looking, and it's worth it to get that couple of days in there. It's almost like the Yoshino cherry. You see it, you're like, oh my God, this is incredible. And then a week later it's gone. Really, this brings you back to really enjoy the moment. That you don't want to extend it. That you just be in the moment with this plant. I love the smell of these two, by the way. This is what it looks up really close. I think this is called the Royal Star, if I remember correctly. You can see the little reproductive parts on there. So other insights into the pollinator garden, keep in mind that females in the fall, they tend to lay their eggs for the springtime. So if you go up like a hollow branch, they can lay them in there. They can lay them in, rotted wood. They can lay them literally in the soil. So be very, very careful when you're doing your gardens in the fall and winter. What I would recommend is leave a garden alone. Don't do anything with taking off the deadheads because the seeds will feed birds. It has a nice appearance during the winter. You just leave them alone until the springtime. Just leave them alone. There's so much nature that can be in there that we have known nothing about. There's all sorts of stuff that's going in there during the wintertime. And having that habitat is really important. Just not for the flowers for us, but for the habitat for the bees during the wintertime. Um, Another thing about bees is try to avoid as much as possible with pesticides. Doing your four seasons garden, and what I mean, you have things that bloom in the spring, things that bloom in the summer, in the fall, and in the winter. There's a lot of plants, as you know now, a lot of plants that bloom in the wintertime. Bring them into your garden. Remember, the late winter, early spring is when the bees and the pollinators are the most hungry. Let them eat. Bring some flowers into your yard. I do love meadows and perennials because they do feed, the native bees. You can put native plants out there. And then in the wintertime, again, just leave it alone. Another thing to think about is during a dry period throughout the year, always have a little bit of water out there. Bees and all the different types of insects, especially the beneficial ones, not the mosquitoes, by the way, they need to drink water. And, we can go into a drought. And when you're into a drought, think about you being thirsty. All these bees and all these other pollinators are thirsty as well. So if you can put a little bit of water out there, but keep in mind about the mosquito larvae in there. Kind of change it every once in a while and make sure that it doesn't produce. But you'll be amazed at the butterflies, the birds, everybody needs water. And again, I can't stress this enough. Leave your annuals and your perennials and all that stuff alone. Remember that bees hibernate. So if you disturb that area, you might be disturbing the bees as well. Don't, I read this, I didn't even think about it, but don't rototill your soil until after the hibernating bees and stuff have emerged. You have plenty of time to do a garden, or do it in the fall and then plant so that you literally don't have to disturb it too much. So, and the last thing, which I was talking to David Yotes about this, he's the one he's the one that brought it up, and I remember seeing like in February seeing this daffodil or this dandelion out there with a bee on it. I was like, oh my God, I never thought about this, and he told me the same thing. He said, you know, some of these weeds that you have in your yard, the lamium and the violets, well, I don't consider a weed at all. You know, the dandelions, the chickweed, the clover, all these plants actually are wonderful for early spring and late winter pollinators. If you can stand a few weeds in your yard, then these will be the ones to go. I live in a neighborhood where a lot of people have tons and tons of violets in their yard, and I just find that amazing. They're just so beautiful. In my yard, I have some lamian in there with the violets, and it just makes a really beautiful lawn in the springtime. And then one side note, and I read this a while ago, and it always amazes me. It's one out of every three bites that you eat, actually, that food is produced by pollinators. It is very, very, very important these days to make sure that we take care of them. One third of our food that we eat is produced by these little tiny pollinators. And we just really need to concentrate on making sure that we secure their home here in the world. So thank you. Back to you, Sally.
Thank you so much. All right, everybody, we will take questions for up to about 20 minutes for anybody who wants to stick around. So, Louis, we'll start with the two main topics that people were asking about. The first is deer resistance. So, I have a few specific plants people asked about that you didn't specifically say whether they were deer resistant or not. So the first
Okay,
is,
so we have, you know, I know that deer are a huge problem. And, you know,
yes.
we do have sources here that we have a whole list of deer resistant plants. But what amazes me is some plants are deer resistant in some areas and some are not. So it's not set in stone. What
Yeah,
I
it
would
depends on how
suggest
hungry they
is
are.
look around, you know, in your neighborhood. You know, there was a lady that said, you know, I have tons of azaleas in my neighborhood, but azaleas aren't deer resistant. And I'm like, go talk to your neighbors. If they're not spraying, if they're not doing this, if they're not doing that, then your actual herd in your neighborhood probably doesn't like azaleas. And we also have the internet out there, which is really helpful for that as well.
Yeah. Well, do you happen to know if hellebore, that was one we had a few people ask, is hellebore one that deer will go to? Do you happen to know that?
Yeah, hellebores are deer resistant to my
Okay.
knowledge. They're over in Peggy's yard, and Peggy has deer, and I
Yeah,
see
she's
them
never
all
had
over the
them.
place.
Yeah, she has no issues with them. Okay, that's
We
good.
were just one concerned about the rabbits. I don't
Yes.
know if they're rabbit resistant though.
Yeah. Um, okay, let's see. Okay. Also, do you know about winter Daphne? That's the other one we specifically got a question about. Is that a deer resistant plant?
Okay, winter jasmine.
The
Well,
Daphne.
over in Reston, when I saw over there, it was a pretty intense concrete area. So I don't know if it is deer resistant. I can and then the ones that are, you know, climbing over Arlington and the ones down at American University, I don't think there's deer around there. So I'm not 100% sure if it's deer resistant. I just pick up my phone and ask Siri if it is or not.
Okay, so unclear. Alrighty, next. So we had a lot of questions, and I know you're filling in. Caitlin, who was originally going to do this class, is really a major specialist on bees specifically. So we had a question about the native plants that are available and the bees. So I know native plants are a little bit sparse in the winter, and you mentioned a few. Are you able to talk about the bees that will eat like specialists versus generalist bees, or is that something we should refer interested parties on to one of our other classes
Okay, I
about.
mean, I can lightly, talk to you
Okay.
about, native plants that come out very early in the spring.
Yeah.
Um, One thing that we have out in the woods where all the native plants exist is the skunk cabbage. Skunk cabbage come out in February, and they come out with their flowers first. And within that flower, which is, hugs the ground, there is there's pollen in there, and I'm sure that the bees know that. There's also the spring beauties, which is a spring therimal, and those femoral, those plants literally come up. They literally take over the bottom of a woods, and they're natives, and they literally do that. Another one that I always think is amazing is a swampy native plant called it's called swamp arium, and it comes out with these snake-looking type of yellow flowers. It's amazing. It grows in a swampy area. I've seen it the with the skunk cabbage, and I have seen bees on that. So there is some natives out there that literally, do give some flowers in the late winter, early spring. But I can't stress enough about trees, about native trees that come out in the springtime that literally can give you some, like the maples, the hardwoods. All those guys, they do produce flowers, and they produce thousands and thousands and thousands of flowers. So when you're looking for native plants and you're looking for natives, remember, there's a huge woods here. There was no grass area. There was none of that. There was just tons of woods. And these native bees literally grew up with these flowering trees that always produce thousands of flowers. So I can't stress enough how important it is to go ahead and put in, these native trees like, the red buds, like the dogwoods, and the red maples, the oak trees. All those guys produce flowers.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Sorry, I've got some questions coming in about spellings and whatnot. Okay, so for camellia, you mentioned that some of the flowers are sterile and some are not. Is that a question of which camellia cultivar you're planting, or is it on a flower by flower basis?
What's the name of the flower?
The camellia.
Wisteria?
Camellia.
Oh, camellias. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you're
Sorry, guys.
talking about from flower to flower. Okay. So camellias in general, when you look at them, and I didn't bring this up, I skipped over it. There's spring and there's winter, or in fall into winter blooming type of camellias. I tend to like the ones that bloom in the fall into winter. There's an extreme amount of bloom time. When you look at the flower itself and you look at all the pieces of the flower, you can tell if it's sterile or not sterile. The other thing is with these type of ones, the ones that bloom in the springtime, actually there's a lot of other flowers that are blooming during that time period as well. I think it's more important to me personally to to go with the fall blooming ones because those are the ones that literally are blooming when nothing else is blooming. Did I answer your question?
So the question was about if the flowers are, can you, when you're purchasing a camellia, are some cultivars sterile and others not?
Okay, so yeah, you can look on your phone, and you need to see the rep, the parts in the middle. If you only see petals and you don't see any pollen or any pistons or anything like that, then it's a sterile flower. It's not going to produce any pollen or any nectar. You can physically see that on the flower. And there's a few out there that are beautiful flowers, don't get me wrong, but they literally do not have any pollen or any nectar in them. And you can
Yeah,
look at them and you can find that out.
it's like some of the hydrangea we have too. Okay, yeah, y'all can also ask us when you come in if you want pointers. We can make sure our team can help you find one.
Yeah, I'd be
Um,
more than happy to help you out with that.
yeah, yeah, Louis personally would be happy to help you as well. All right, let's see. Next question. Okay, this person is interested in the apricot Peggy Clark. What are the sun and shade conditions for it? Um, is it deer resistant? Although it's a tree, so I imagine you'd have issues with in the fall more so.
Okay, so what's the name of the plant again?
Apricot Peggy Clark.
Okay, so a apricot Debbie clock is an understory tree. It's almost like a cherry tree. It takes full sun, or gets a little bit of sun on the top. Um, when you're talking about deer-resistant plants in general, a lot of those understory trees, what you have to be concerned about is not necessarily them being eaten by deer, but by the bucks in the fall marking their territory. I always suggest if you have a deer problem and you have a young tree, is to put some kind of, fence around it so that those males can't take their horns and mess up that tree. They can demolish a tree in no time at all. Um, a lot of those understory trees too, if they eat, they can eat the bottom of them if they need be. Usually they don't. They eat other things instead. You there's so many other plants out there that are more edible than than these guys. But eating the bottom branches is not necessarily a big deal because these trees get large. They get 15, 18 feet high, 12, 14 feet wide. So even if they do eat some of the bottom branches on there or some of the leaves, it's not a big deal because they basically have the upper part of that tree that they can't reach. The other thing to consider too is that deer don't like to taste things. They like very bland type diets. So something that's very fragrant, they're not going to like that. So those flowers are probably safe in the springtime because the deer don't like fragrant flowers very much.
Yeah, we actually just had someone send me a note that they have deer that will pull plants out of the ground and then throw them on the grass if they don't like the way they taste. I'm sorry, I know that happens to people. For anyone interested, we do have a full class on deer, managing deer issues in the garden. Just send a note to me. I'll put my email address out there. All right, here's our last question. This is a popular one with David Yost. Um, the DC landscapers and public parks have started cleaning out some of the native pollinator habitat this week. So like the old plants and things. Um, when would you recommend that people hold on cleaning up their landscapes until? Would you recommend waiting until March or later? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, definitely. So, I'm into four season gardens and I'm into natural habitats for animals, for bees, for everything. And so I look out in nature and I can learn from nature as to what to do. And basically, what I would suggest is, again, leaving the leaves, leaving the branches, leave everything alone. And then once you start to see the spring coming, then you start slowly doing what you need to do. It should not be an event, it should be a process. For instance, when you start to see those hellebores coming out and you start to see the little ones, go out there and cut off the leaves. Chop them up, cut them up and just lay them down on the ground next to it. Don't even remove them from your garden. Let them literally break down into the soil. And then all of a sudden you start to see like your salvia starting to come up. When you see the salvia starting to come up, then you're like, okay, let's go ahead and cut back our salvia right now. And let's say, with this plant or that plant, look at the individual cases. There's no reason why, to make an event of it for like a couple hours to go out there and do, everything at once. Go out there and learn about your garden, learn about the different parts of it. When you're going out there, look at the plants. Which ones are emerging? Which ones aren't? Do you see bees coming out of this area? Do you find that the birds are still eating, the seeds off of these dead heads? Then just leave them there. It's more of a feel more so than a regimen of, we need to do it on March the 17th, at St. Patrick's Day or something is the day to start doing this. Different plants emerge at different times. So you really do need to get a feel and get in touch with how these plants are talking to you, how they want you to help them out through the season. It's not one of those things where you just go out there on a certain day and get rid of everything. Does that
All
make sense?
right. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you, Louie. Thank you so much. That's all of our questions. So everybody, if you have any questions or you want to follow up for any of those links I mentioned, please feel free to email me. I just put my email out in the chat. Louie, do you have anything you'd like to wrap up with?
Oh, I just want to say thank you. I really enjoy doing these seminars, and if you ever want to come in, and I love talking gardens. So if you ever want to come in, we have a little downtime during the wintertime in the greenhouse right now. So if you ever want to come in and talk about your garden, I'm always here for you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Louie. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. And we'll send out those the recording and a coupon for you all tomorrow. Louie, see you later. Bye, everyone.
Okay, I'll see you, Sally. See you, everybody.